This is Stefan Stanford with Suzanne Duclos from Before It's News and All News Pipeline. And we're honored to have the opportunity today to talk to Dr. Jim Willie, editor of Hat Trick Letter and founder of goldenjackass.com. Welcome, Dr. Willie.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be on. It's the first time, and kind of excited.
So are we. It's great to have you with us. I wanted to jump right into one of your recent interviews talking about the economic endgame arriving. Can you explain to those of us who are not financial gurus how the endgame will affect everyday, ordinary Americans?
Okay, the endgame is a very general term, but what I mean by that is finally the Western, by that I mean London, New York, and certain pockets in Western Europe, they're going to lose control finally of their tight headlock on financial markets and banking functions. We're in the end game here where the dollar is rising, and this rise in the dollar and fall in gold does not mean dollar strength. It means that the dollar is being used as a weapon, and foreign nations are suffering tremendous damage. They cannot compete with the United States that prints money. They cannot do it themselves, so they hunker down with dollars, and before you know it, you see, people in France say, well, I'm going to just abandon my euro. I'm going to buy more dollars with my savings. I want to preserve it. The dollar is the reserve. Okay, well, the dollar is going to rise and rise and rise and then die suddenly. I've been saying this for 2 or 3 years. It sounds paradoxical. You think that a rising dollar means strength. It doesn't. You've got a lot of different nations and individuals trying to preserve their life savings, their business treasuries, and they're hunkering down in dollars because their nations cannot compete with the United States that prints money. There's a second very important phenomenon, and that is as things fracture, you're seeing a collapse of a lot of different financial instruments. You have things like banks going under, companies going under. Their insurance policies are called credit default swaps. So just think of them as fire insurance policies, but not against a house, against the failure of a company. So these insurance policies are all written in dollars. So what you're seeing now is some demand, not for economic development in the dollar, but for payoff of business failures. And the insurance policies are in dollars. You've also got another phenomenon that's just colossal, and that's the abuse of what's called the interest rate swap derivative. A lot of these bonds that are being purchased by the United States, apart from bond monetization, the Fed is just printing money and using it to cover the government debt, printing money and using it to cover Wall Street mortgage bonds, printing money and using it to cover all kinds of things, but for the elite. All right, so the other thing that is being used in there is the free money. We got a zero interest rate. The free money is going into this machine. This machine takes the free money and converts it from, say, short-term treasury bills into long-term treasury bonds. It borrows on a short-term basis. Just think of it as a 3-month or a 1-year loan. And with that borrowed money, they're buying treasury bonds. So the feeder system is free. It's the 0% money. The output is treasury bond demand. So you're seeing a tremendous amount of purchase of treasury bonds that are not based in reality or savings or any real money. It's all artificial coming out of the Fed and JP Morgan. The result is a colossal flow of new dollars. And this is actually pushing the dollar up on the Forex markets, the foreign exchange currency markets, because out come this money and suddenly there's a purchase of a treasury bond. All right, well, that's pressure up for the dollar. This is not positive. It's all artificial. And by endgame, I mean this is not going to last much longer. It's breaking. You cannot push down the oil price like the US and the Saudis are doing. They're trying to damage Russia. You cannot push down the ruble like they're doing to damage Russia. This will not stand much longer because, first of all, the systems are breaking, and second of all, the Russians and Chinese are running out of patience. There's a final device that I've heard, you guys. This is really exciting. If it weren't so dangerous and ugly, it would be more fun. But the exciting part for bringing about the end chapter, or for facilitating the end game, for taking the controls out of the hands of the US, British, and Western European fascist bankers, out of their hands. The device is that China is going to suddenly double the gold price. I mean, like overnight. And they're suddenly going to triple the silver price. So we're talking about something on the order of $2,800 gold price, maybe $3,000, what the heck, and $50 to $60 silver price. It's not clear exactly when, and it's not clear exactly what the prices are going to be, but I'm told that the project has already been decided. The dates are not decided, but China is going to give a giant FU to the Western bankers, the I call them fascists. We got to get clear on what these fascists are. That neocon means fascist, and now they're joining forces with the Democrats, and it's one giant fascist party running the U.S. So as they double the precious metal prices, they're going to blow up all the Western bankers' derivatives, which are major contracts, Forex derivatives, major contracts that link the British pound, the euro, and the dollar and the yen, link them all together to fight against gold. Gold is going to win.
So you say
I call it a hot poker up the West fascist bankers' butts. We got a hot poker coming by way of Shanghai when they double the precious metal prices. It's going to be exciting, going to be extremely disruptive. And it's coming not in a couple of years. It's going to be a few months, several months, something like that. Very hard to say.
with all this free money going into the machine, this free money is also going into the police state building up all around us. You recently stated, and now we're dying as a system, as a national economy. I think we're dying as a nation. It's pretty clear to those of us who are paying attention that with this economy collapsing, there's no way to save it. Is there any way to save what most Americans really care about, freedom in America? Is there any way to save our souls?
Well, I think in order to save our freedom and to save our national soul, we need to save our economy. And I don't know that it's possible to save it at this point. We also have to save our financial structure. And the only way to do that is to liquidate the evil, corrupt, insolvent big banks. This too big to fail, too big to manage, too big to jail, call it whatever you want. But these banks hold the power. JP Morgan is kind of a partner to the Fed. They've got an underground tunnel. They exchange gold. These big banks are a crime syndicate. They're not going to permit their own liquidation. So if you want to save the national soul, you need to integrate the gold standard because the dollar has turned cancerous. You cannot print 50, 60, 80 billion dollars a month, as the Federal Reserve Central Bank is doing, without very harsh consequences, not only to the global and U.S. economy, but also to the faith and trust in the system of all the currencies. So as you print more dollars, there's wreckage. There's extreme wreckage. And it's one of my pet topics, this consequence of the Federal Reserve's quantitative easing. You know, for those not really sophisticated, what we've done is we've realized that the government has annual $1 trillion deficits. And as of last year, very, very few foreign entities, like central banks and sovereign wealth funds, like the Saudis or the UAE sovereign wealth funds, the Norwegians. They don't want to buy any more treasury bonds. So in response to the absent demand, the U.S. decided to have the Fed integrate a bond purchase program, and they're doing it in the most caustic, corrosive, dangerous manner. It's called unsterilized. In the past, we've seen instances where the Fed will print money to buy bonds, but they'll remove other money from the banking system, remove while adding, and that's called sterilized. That has a very slight effect on the system. It distorts the system because they're pulling out of one area and adding to another, but on a net basis, it's even on the money supply. What we've been doing now since the middle of 2012 is printing money and not pulling it out of the system. It's unsterilized. It's raw hyper monetary inflation. So it has a lot of effects. I don't know if you want to talk right now. Shall I get into Suzanne and Stefan? Shall I get into the really difficult challenges that QE brings? It cannot be permanent. It's permanent. It's QE to infinity, but it's going to break the system. It's a guarantee to break the system. Should I get into my main point of how this alters the U.S. in a tremendously significant way?
Of course, we would. Our readers and our viewers would definitely want to hear what you have to say in that, especially in that area.
All right. Well, that's just me being polite, taking a little sip of water. Okay, I understand. Okay, as the U.S. enjoys the benefit of quantitative easing and the bond purchasing, it covers the debt. And I like to put a preface in there. The U.S. government came out with a statement saying that the debt went down, the deficit went down for the U.S. government to $570 billion last fiscal year. But if you subtract the current deficit, debt, net, what do you call it? Total national debt. If you subtract the total at the end of September, subtract one from the other, you got the end of year 2013, you got the end of year 2014. Take the difference and you get $1 trillion difference. So they've done accounting gimmicks and they lie through their teeth. It's not 580, it's 1 point something trillion. Again, I mentioned in 2009, we're going to have annual $1 trillion deficits for as far as the eye can see. That's 09, 10, 11, 12, 13, and 14. 5 straight years correct forecast for the jackass. All right, so no one wants, oh gosh, a few want. China extended the game a little bit by buying a few in recent months of the treasury bonds. Japan did too, because they got their own problems and they're really in a cyclone over there in their finances. So the Fed has come to the rescue of the U.S. government to cover most of its debt. This has never been seen before in the history of the United States. Never. We got artificial demand covering, financing the U.S. government debt. All right. That means that on the financial front, the U.S. government with its partners or masters at the Federal Reserve can cover the debt. Now, as foreign nations start losing their trust and start regarding the U.S. treasuries as not having that prestige anymore, they're going to get rid of their treasuries. They're going to start diversifying, and it's going to cause some problems with the U.S. government. It's going to cause friction. But whatever the effect is politically, let's just focus on the finance side. I think on a hidden basis, the Federal Reserve is covering foreign dumping of treasury bonds. I think they're lying about the 50 billion or 80 billion a month. I think it's more like 200 to 300 billion dollars a month. I think it's on the order of 2 to 3 or 4 trillion dollars a year of unsterilized money hitting the U.S. financial system and the Western and global financial systems. So Whether it's the government debt to finance or the foreign dumping of treasuries to cover, the Fed can handle it. But what can they not handle? Here we get to the rejection, or how should we say, avoidance of the US dollar in trade. Notice for the last several years, started in Brazil in 2006, the yuan swap facilities. It sounds exotic, but let me explain what it is. The example with Brazil is perfect because they renewed it and renewed it again. It started in 2006, could have been the year before. But what they do is they say, all right, these 3 big Chinese banks are going to work closely with these 5 mid-sized and large Brazilian banks, and all the trade that goes between Brazil and China will be settled on a bilateral basis without usage of the dollar, and we'll use this yuan swap facility to cover, say, very short-term loans. Just think of the letter of credit, the short-term grease and lubrication to the process. In the United States, we have commercial paper. In between Brazil and China, they use the yuan lending facility, the swap facility. So between Brazil and China, no dollars changed hands. All right, now you've got between 18 and 22 different nations who've installed yuan swap facilities. And they're not just little Asian nations. No, Japan has one. Australia has one with China. England now has one. Frankfurt, Germany installed one. Paris has one. All kinds of other Asian nations do, but I like to focus on the West because the West is where you're seeing the reduction on a sharp basis year over year in usage of the dollar in trade, primarily with China. And China is really the giant on the block because they're the biggest volume trader, import and export in the world right now. They've surpassed the United States. So as you've got less in the way of dollars being used for trade settlement, you're also seeing these nations say, well, we just don't want any more treasury bonds. The Fed can't say, all right, we'll take all your bonds and we can guarantee the imports to the United States. That's the big vulnerability. How is the United States going to bring in imports? I don't care what country it is. I don't care what product it is. I don't care if it's a finished product or a crude metal or a crude oil. How is the U.S., which imports about half of, just rough figures, maybe it's 45 or 52%, I don't know. Doesn't matter. It's about half. How is the U.S. economy going to guarantee import supply for all the supply chains within the U.S. economy? How are they going to do it if foreign nations say, we don't want to be paid in treasuries anymore? We don't want these treasury bills. We don't want these treasury bonds. Bills are short-term, bonds are long-term. We don't want any more treasuries. We're actually trying to reduce what we have in our banking systems. I'm talking like Korea or Spain or Belarus, whatever. We don't want your treasuries anymore. How is the U.S. going to supply itself from imports? That is the breaking point for the U.S. economy, and the Ukraine war is only accelerating this because Russia and China are really not going to trade much anymore in the dollar. And as Russia and China trade less in the dollar, all their partners are going to trade less in the dollar. So all bilateral Russia trade, all bilateral China trade, like India and Russia, like India and China, they're not going to use the dollar anymore. As this aversion to the dollar takes place, aggravated by the Ukraine war, you're going to see these nations develop a very strong unwillingness to take more treasuries from the United States to cover the bills on imports to the United States. And you get a breakdown of the dollar. That's what's coming. And I think the resolution is going to be the launch of a new dollar They're calling it the Treasury note dollar as opposed to the current federal note dollar. Take a look at your dollar bill, the $20 bill, $10 bill. It says Federal Reserve note. They're going to go away. You're going to be replaced by what's called a Treasury note dollar. I'm calling it the Scheiss dollar. That's German for shit. This Scheiss dollar is going to be different. It's going to be devaluated out of the gate. I'm hearing 30%. When you have a 30% devaluation, take your 7 over 10, invert it 10 over 7, and what you get is a 40% increase in all imports. You get a 30% devaluation of the dollar, results in a 42% increase in the price of any import. I'm talking about Toyota cars. I'm talking about German cameras. I'm talking about Japanese construction equipment. I'm talking about all the imports. Suddenly, the United States is going to find itself in a very awkward and dangerous, vulnerable position. With the devaluation, they're going to have to resort to their own fundamentals. Remember the $1 trillion deficit. They're going to have to address the $1 trillion deficit, or else they're going to have a devaluation of the new dollar of 10, 20% every single month. This is shocking. It sounds like it's not credible, not believable. It can't happen. When the foreigners stop accepting treasuries, that's exactly what's going to happen. They will not be able, the U.S. will not be able to use its dollar anymore and pay with treasuries. The new dollar will stand on its own merits, and it has none. We have inadequate industry. We're outsourcing too much. It was a deadly suicidal path that started in the 1980s. Let me give you an example of how pernicious this effect will be. It's two things: pensions and output diversion. We've got about $17 trillion in pensions in the United States, pension funds. I think 2 or 3 trillion of it is IRAs and 401ks and KIOs. I believe all of them will be forced into treasury bonds for investment to cover some of the debt. They've got to cover $1 trillion deficit for the U.S. government. So what's the annual increase, the increment to the personal pension funds of IRA, KIO, and 401k? I think it's on the order of $300 or $400 billion a year and going down. So they're going to lock in that, force the American citizens to invest in the broken U.S. government debt system. All right, that's just one little piece. The bigger piece is much uglier, and it has to do with shortages. If the United States has a lot of farm output, they're likely to say, well, the government's likely to say, we really would like you to divert 30 or 40% of your farm output for more exports because we really need that extra money to balance off our current account deficit, which goes together with the government deficit and goes together with the trade deficit. The overall end of the calculation, bottom line net, is your current account deficit, because that's your trade deficit of goods and services. And then it factors in all the financial things like foreigners buying property, foreigners buying our bonds, whether they're treasury bonds or mortgage bonds or corporate bonds or whatever. So the net is the current account deficit. The U.S. must address their current account deficit, which is on the order of $500 billion a year. They will do that by diverting industrial and agricultural output so that we get shortages in the United States. If you think I'm crazy, take a look at Venezuela. They did a 30% currency devaluation followed by a 40% currency devaluation, both in 1 year. That's 75% compounded. All right, so 75%. That's 25 over 100. Flip it, it's 100 over 25. So imports are now 4 times more costly, 300% price inflation for imports in Venezuela. And what's their reaction? They're exporting more oil, they're exporting more beans, they're exporting more rice, and they have shortages of all three. Okay, that's my little explanation of what's coming to the United States. The QE, the Fed, can cover the bonds. They cannot force foreigners to accept more treasury bonds, and the United States is going to run out of alleyway and can no longer rely on the dollar anymore. The dollar is going away.
Which that brings
If
that
you're not shocked,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
go ahead.
Well, that brings
No, I'm just going to say if you're not shocked, I'm just going to say if you're not shocked, you're not paying attention.
Oh, I am shocked, and that brings us back to the original question that I asked, and you just gave the exact answer. You're saying we're going to see these shortages. So basically, when the dollar goes, I mean, face it, we pay out so much in welfare. That's going to go. We're going to see food shortages. We're going to see shortages of almost everything right here. That's how it's going to affect the everyday American. Are we going to see riots? Are we going to see total chaos?
I think so. That's why they're militarizing all the police forces around the country. By the way, back in 2009, I've got a very smart, connected friend here. I call him Cato in my work. They don't like to have their names spread around. I call him Cato. Cato told me in 2009 that the Obama administration, one of the first acts and deeds for change you can believe in, was to set up a $230 billion budget with Homeland Security to supply militarized weapons to states and local police authorities across the 50 different states. They knew what's coming. They know the chaos is coming. I think the chaos is going to come in 3 areas. I've said that the shortage, they're going to come where you're going to have violence where the shortages appear. I've been saying for 3 years, you're going to see shortages of gasoline and diesel. So gas stations. You're going to see shortages in the supermarkets for food. You're going to see shortages of cash in the ATM machines. So in all 3 sites, expect to see violence. Expect to see gasoline stations blowing up, the fireball reaching 200 meters upward. The violence is going to be horrible, and we're probably going to get at least some martial law. Now, I've got an example of something in Costa Rica. We have a new president here. I don't want to get into a lot of details for this country because I live here. I don't want to insult it and get into trouble. But as of May and June, a new president is in the country of Costa Rica, and he's got a couple policies. He's got a little bit of a socialist background, but he's a good guy. He seems to be an honest fellow, and he has a nice smile. And he has a very nice suit. That goes over well, but he talks about fairness a lot. What they're having to do is trying to reduce the Costa Rican government budget deficit. So I just heard this yesterday. A friend of mine has a girlfriend in Costa Rica, and the girl's father is a retiree. He's somewhere around 70 years old, and he just noticed that his pension was cut in half. Okay. The U.S. is advisor to this new president, and they're giving them a lot of ideas for new taxes and reducing the budget deficit. I'd like to give them some ideas for capital formation. The trouble is that socialists and fascists don't know anything about capitalism, capital formation, new businesses. No, they know everything about taxes and business destruction and capital waste. So expect in the United States that this 51% of the population that is very dependent on the government handouts, whether it's welfare, aid to dependent children, extension for joblessness or whatever. I'm sympathetic to the need. I don't like the manner in which it's addressed. Expect that 51% to see their benefits and aid cut in half, because the U.S. is going to need to reduce its annual government deficit. It's going to need to work to help bring down the current account deficit, which is the difference between what comes out and what comes in to the nation. I'm really looking forward to the first indication of some of the details for the new Scheist dollar, what they're going to call it. I'm hearing they're going to call it the Treasury Note Dollar. And they better change the color of it. I heard that they printed some. Maybe it's a trial basis to test with, like, focus groups. But I heard that it's going to be red.
Oh.
I heard red, and I think, oh, blood red for the Satanists running the U.S. government and banking system. These guys are largely Satanists. And if you're wondering what happened at Sandy Hook, check into it. The school had been closed for months. There were no children there. There's a Connecticut law that says you cannot force through the law, a legally binding search for the identities and whereabouts of the missing children. I believe they're off for sacrifices to the Satanist bankers, who put them on their chests and disembowel them and drink their blood so they can get the fountain of youth. We really need to wake up to who these fascists are. Their symbols are all over the place. In Hollywood, it's the string of stars. It's the pyramid with the eye on it. By the way, the pyramid with the eye on it is on the back of the $1 bill. These are Satanist symbols. And now we got a new law in Florida that says, gosh, with the separation of church and state, the Florida schools and children should be, what's the word, how they do it? No obstacles should be prevented for exposing them to Satanism. I mean, this is really getting out of control. The bankers have wrecked the system. They've refused to liquidate. In fact, 2008, when they liquidated and killed Lehman Brothers, that was to avoid a bank failure for Goldman Sachs. And I believe J.P. Morgan would have been right behind them. Goldman Sachs had huge mortgage bond exposure. So what they did was they cut off all the payments to Lehman Brothers that they were owed legally from contracts, cut them off of their cash supply on redemption of sold instruments in the bond and futures markets and the stock market, whatever, and they forced them into death. They killed Lehman Brothers to save Goldman Sachs. And more evidence is, if you take a look at the derivative payouts for the insurance, they're basically financial insurance contracts. The government took over AIG, and the first thing they did was to give 100 cents on the dollar to all the Goldman Sachs insurance policies. All the rest of the people got 60 cents and 30 cents, and Goldman Sachs got full redemption. So Lehman Brothers was a bailout of Goldman Sachs. And who controls the U.S. Treasury Department? Goldman Sachs. We have a string of Goldman Sachs people running the Treasury Department ever since Robert Rubin in 1992 with the Clinton administration. I'd like to mention a real oddball thing, Suzanne and Stefan. Bush II, his original Treasury Secretary was John Snow, a real dolt. He was a CEO of CSX Railway Company. What was he doing in the Treasury Department secretary post? Why did Bush II select a railroad executive as Treasury Secretary?
That's a good question. That's a very good question.
Because he had control of port facilities, and they wanted to lock down all the narcotics distribution routes. Just a theory. A theory that makes more sense for me with every passing year. Go ahead.
Yeah, a good theory at that. Dr. Willie, Ebola is big in the news nowadays. It appears that bioweapons may have been unleashed upon Americans. What are your thoughts about Ebola, this whole thing? Is this a false flag unfolding? What are we looking at?
Well, the false flag is a general term nowadays, being used a lot, but I think that certain agencies that operate out of Virginia as part of the U.S. government, I think they're responsible. Very few people realize that most of these nasty viruses that have made their way around the world have come from the Fort Detrick, Maryland, U.S. Army Bioweapons Laboratory. They're manufactured, fabricated, and developed. I noticed a few hints, um, like the Bill Gates Foundation, the George Soros Foundations. They were funding a very dangerous experimental laboratory in Sierra Leone. And apparently Sierra Leone is where some of the Ebola has emanated from. And I heard that some of the passengers, at least one or two of the passengers on the second Malaysian airline, in particular one, was going to testify at the International Court of The Hague against Bill Gates and George Soros. Let me just say that he never made it to Netherlands on that flight. Another hint that I noticed was typically when you have a very serious virus outbreak, you quarantine. But the U.S. did something different. They imported the Ebola to the United States. They even talked about it. And they used a flimsy cover for an excuse saying, we want to study it further. You never do that. You quarantine. There was a movie with Dustin Hoffman and Rene Russo and an Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor. Pardon me?
Outbreak.
Outbreak?
That's the name
Outbreak,
of the movie.
yes. Well, the movie got a Best Supporting Actor Oscar for Cuba Gooding Jr. He was the helicopter pilot. He was a very colorful fellow, one of my favorite actors. Anyway, you saw how the typical response is in a good world. They isolated a village and they bombed it. And the big story in the United States was this location, I think it was Northern California or Oregon, I'm not really sure. The big race was, well, let's find this damn monkey and let's fix this and get a vaccine, not a vaccine, but a serum to cure it quickly so we don't have to bomb the village. We're not doing that. We're spreading it. And we're spreading it through vaccines. I got a quick story. I know I'm getting a little long-winded in some of the side stories, but in Costa Rica in 2008, I told my new girlfriend, and she didn't have a lot of trust in me. She knew that I was, working as a gringo on this financial thing that she didn't understand, a newsletter, and gee, what's that all about? But I told her, tell all of your 7 aunts and all of your 4 uncles not to take the swine flu vaccine. They were told by their school officials and the government here, take the vaccine. Well, word got out to about, I think it was 14 different little cousins and nieces and nephews. And when you have so many aunts and uncles, some of them are older and some of them are younger, but the little kids, they're either cousins or they're nephews and nieces. It's pretty funny. She's got an aunt who's only 7 years older than her, and they're like sisters. But it's funny. But I told her, okay, I rounded up 2 or 3 of the aunts that I had met, and I said, look, I'm just dead serious. This vaccine is not what you think. This is not good. Don't take it. Look around you. You don't know anybody who's got this disease, so there's no great need for vaccine. And what happened was I heard 2 years later, all 14 kids that were warned and did not take the vaccine have no problem at all. One kid, it was reported, it's an aunt that they don't have much contact with, and one of her kids is 12, and different father. It's messy. It's so not really connected to the nuclear family so well. She's got a mysterious brain disease that the hospitals cannot figure out. I told the aunts to tell this woman, the mother, to look into Guillain-Barré syndrome, which is laced in with the other diseases in the swine flu vaccine. It killed over 30,000 Americans, most of them in the South and most of them black. They stopped it because it got adverse publicity. The Swedish National Nurses Union refused to take it, refused to give it. And it just got more and more nasty publicity. And so what does the U.S. have now up its sleeve? Something even more potent. And to close this topic that's quite dangerous, actually, let me just point out that this is a fabricated virus. It's a super virus. It's not like the standard Ebola, because the Center for Disease Control in Atlanta has a patent on it. There's money to be made with the vaccines, especially if the vaccines contain the disease, so that more vaccines will be called for and more treatment. This is how you get epidemics. And I'm hoping it has the same fate and outcome as swine flu. Some victims, but it got aborted. I'm hoping that happens. Why on earth would the U.S. official agency have a patent on Ebola? And, you know, take a look at the porous southern borders of Texas, Arizona, New Mexico, California. All right, we've got someone who just died in Texas, I think it was. Cases being cited now. Are these Mexicans coming across the border with lots of diseases? Hell yes. Is that the plan? I don't know, but how about if we use inductive reasoning? If they wanted to stop it, wouldn't they close the borders more?
Exactly. Exactly.
Couldn't have said it better.
Well, the super viruses, the vaccines, and all of that are well, there's enough to do a whole other show on that, because we have the EV68. People are suffering polio symptoms, and there's a lot of evidence out there showing that all these kids have been vaccinated. So that's enough to put in another whole 40 minutes. Maybe we can have you back for it. I want to thank you.
I'm not an expert in it, so I would. I'm not an expert in that, so I wouldn't accept the invitation.
Okay. True. But you've made some very good points, and each one of them are very valid. So we do thank you for at least delving into that and for answering our questions and being here with us. Our readers love you, and this is going to be an excellent article and video. Thank you again.
Thank you so much, sir. It's been wonderful having you.
Okay, it's been my pleasure, you guys. I hope to be on again sometime. Let's let some time pass, because I guarantee you, in 2 months, the landscape won't look the same. It won't look better either. It'll look worse.
It looks that way.
Okay.